Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Hardware Podcast. My name's Jackson Danner alongside my good friend Omar Borja. Today we have got our week 7 preview in college football, and we're also going to be, as we're transitioning, looking into college football awards since that's what we started all about, right? And as we're looking towards the postseason, we're going to be going over one of these positional awards as well.
Yeah, I'm excited to hop into positional awards. It feels like the right time to just start doing that gradually. I guess like the Heisman race, I don't think the Heisman race has changed much from what we talked about last week. I mean, you still got Stetson Bennett. Uh, Bryce Young got hurt last week against Texas A&M, so you have him. CJ Stroud, you have the usual suspects. As for other guys emerging, Chase Brown was hurt a little bit by his performance against Iowa, but I have a feeling that this weekend, Minnesota versus Illinois will not only be a Big Ten West elimination game, but also a Heisman elimination game. May the best running back win between Chase Brown and Mo Ibrahim. So I'm excited for that one. That's just classic Big Ten football, Jackson. Like two running backs, like coming into the game together or coming into the game, expecting to get like 20, 30 carries, and the best guy will lead this team to victory, especially with Illinois, Tommy DeVito, going out. So, or likely expected to be out for the Fighting Illini. But DTR continued his tear. I feel like DTR. So I feel like DTR's run for Heisman is it's special compared to other ones like Kyler Murray. I see a DTR style of play. Like I compare it to Kyler Murray's honestly. But like Kyler Murray's Heisman campaign really wasn't launched like that early. But like DTR, every single test he's had so far, he's come through with flying colors and just like thrilled at all levels. So that's currently like my favorite for the Heisman. But yeah.
If DTR is having the season that he's having at a Kentucky or a Purdue, where it's not a nothing program, but it's not the market of Los Angeles, do you think we're paying this much attention to him this early on in the year?
I think so because it took a while for if DTR did not have those highlight reel plays against Washington on a Friday night, I don't think I'd be talking about him in this way. Like, I mean, sure he had a great game, but the Friday night did him justice because if you look at their non-conference schedule, like I think two of the three non-conference games, actually all three of the non-conference games were on the Pac-12 network. So the first, like in fact, the first time I'd seen the Pac-12 seen live television on the Pac-12 network in 6 years was when I walked into a Wingstop on Sunday. So that just shows you that I've gone 6 years between watching, or sorry, 5 years between watching the Pac-12 network on TV. But yeah, that's beyond the point. But yeah, like it's just exposure because like you mentioned Kentucky, like Will Levis is a guy that draft guys are high on. I'm not sure how high on Will Levis you are, Jackson, but like even then you mentioned like Kentucky, not a blue blood, but the exposure was there. The SEC network at least gets a lot more carries than the Pac-12 network. He had games on ESPN as well. Of
Even the
course, the Florida
ACC
game.
network having one
Yeah,
of the biggest games this week in Syracuse and North Carolina State. The Pac 12 could not do that to its own conference
no,
if they put
no,
it on the Pac
absolutely not.
12 network.
Yeah, absolutely not. I didn't even realize that game was an ACC network either, honestly. So I'd have to look. I'd have to take a look at the schedule this weekend to see how deep the ACC's rolling, for their slate. But yeah, like, I don't think it's a market. I think in the day and age where it's like with social media, where like DTR can be one of the trending topics on Twitter because he hurdled a Washington linebacker or like juked out two Washington linebackers because on Twitter, like I don't think it has anything to do with the market. But yeah,
Twitter fame is a whole different world, and unfortunately, it plays a part in Heisman voting as well.
absolutely.
Before we do anything else, I do want to go ahead and go with our HBCU Pigskin Showdown Player of the Week to watch. Omar, I'll let you go ahead and go first, and I'll give mine.
Yeah, so for my first guy, we got a little Fayetteville State love. I mean, if you were aware of the draft process last year, remember Joshua Williams for Fayetteville State getting drafted by the Kansas City Chiefs. And speaking of Chiefs, what a great game last night between the Raiders and the Chiefs. Like I feel like Monday Night Football is getting back to like it's former greatness, and it's not because of Joe Buck and Troy Aikman, not because of them. I want to make that clear. But just the games are just amazing. They're just amazing. But Barry Elliott had 3 catches for sorry. I gotta find it. Yeah, my bad. Yeah, Barry Elliott, he had 3 catches for over 104 yards 141 yards to be exact, 3 touchdowns, including an 83-yard touchdown pass. Barry Elliott had probably the most electric receiving performance of the country, of the entire country. On the year, he's got 15 catches for 366 yards and 5 touchdowns, a true deep threat. And I mean, honestly, he's got good size. He's 6 foot, 175. So he's got that mix of size and kind of like, I guess, speed. If he puts a little bit more meat on him, he could be a better pro prospect, I think. But I mean, geez, 3 catches on 41 yards, 3 touchdowns. That's like Randy Moss against the Cowboys and Thanksgiving type numbers in a 54-0 win for Fayetteville State over St. Augustine's.
I'll go ahead and go with my HBCU Pigskin Showdown Player of the Week to watch. Alfonso Graham, the running back from Morgan State, the fastest running back in the MEAC, right? Versus Norfolk State last week, 23 attempts for just over 200 yards and a touchdown. On the year, 75 attempts, almost 500.5 yards, and are 542 yards rather than 4 touchdowns. Omar, at this point, I'm almost contractually obligated when we talk about running backs to say, if you can't catch, you can't play, right? He can do a bit of both. He has 10 receptions on the years for 74 yards and a touchdown, including a season high 4 receptions this past week. Either a touchdown or at least 100 yards rushing in every game, either or, sometimes both. So you can bang on consistency for him, right? It's been a tough year for Morgan State. Yes, I know that Coach Grove and Coach Williams, and especially the league, right? They don't overlook talent on bad teams just because voters do. So that is definitely a plus for him down the road. Man, the MEAC as a whole has been having a difficult year, right? But Graham has really been a bright spot. It's rare you see such like fast running backs run between the tackles so often, right? He's had some draws where he just goes through the A or B gaps and then he bursts through the hole, and he also has the speed to beat the safety to the end zone, right? So my only complaint with him, and you can't even call this a complaint really, we don't really see the yards after contact. It's because he doesn't really get much contact, right? So it's that he's running by so many guys and using just his elusiveness to get by guys, and he doesn't really need that contact balance necessarily even. But awesome. Love watching Alfonso Graham. Looking forward to seeing him finish out the year strong, even though it's not looking so good for Morgan State right now.
Well, I'm told I'm just a bit Jackson on Morgan State because I mean they're one game into the MEAC, but it's like little room for error in that conference. As you know, there's 6 teams. You play 5 conference games a year. They did have some good wins outside of conference. I know Neil was talking to me about it. Neil Boudreau, a friend of the podcast, is talking to me about some of the big wins Morgan State had. The loss against Norfolk State hurts because now there is no room for error. I mean, they're gonna have to beat North Carolina Central, which is a tall task. North Carolina Central having good wins against NCA&T, New Hampshire, a ranked New Hampshire squad. As well as South Carolina State, who has had a tough go in non-conference, but it was the same story last year where South Carolina State had a tough go in non-conference, but ended up going to the Celebration Bowl with a 6-5 record and ended up defeating Jackson State handily in the Celebration Bowl. So I mean, things will pick up in the MEAC, but it should be very intriguing, honestly. But yeah, Alfonso Graham was the truth this past weekend. It's just a shame that that Morgan State couldn't come up with the dub with that game, but I mean they're not dead in the MEAC at all.
I didn't get a chance to watch that game live. I do find it surprising, though. I know you control the line of scrimmage, and I know you control the time of possession, even though they don't always, or at least it's not easily accessible to keep track of those stats right at that level. So it's interesting to me that they did not win after that, because when your running back gives you 200 yards, and like I said, you had to have controlled the clock with that many attempts. I believe it was, 23 attempts on it. So it's 23 rushing attempts. So it's interesting to say the least.
Yeah, I think it came down to turnovers because I think Morgan State turned the ball over a couple times in some crucial spots from what Neil was telling me. I think there was a fumble at the goal line. I think Graham did
I
fumble at the
think
goal
that might
line.
have even been Graham. I could be mistaken on that, but
I believe it was. That's what Neil said. Neil said it was Graham. I'm looking at the box score right now, but I mean, it just comes down to turnovers when you dominate a team in the stats column. Like no matter what, it's just the turnovers that get you. And looking at the team stats here, we have So Morgan State they outrushed Norfolk State 259 to 120. Passing yards wasn't there. I mean, it wasn't really necessary to have much of a passing game from Morgan State, but they did have that one fumble, and it was a huge fumble in the end. Because I do think it was in the red zone at least, if not by the goal line.
Whenever you don't come away, it's tough enough coming away with just a field goal, right? Whenever you come away with no points, it's always heartbreaking. I trust Neil more than anyone else probably when it comes to Morgan State football. So awesome to hear his opinion. I'll have to reach out to him to see his thoughts on everything. But I mean, it is objectively like a disappointing season for Morgan State, right? But yes, almost everyone in the MEAC is having a little bit of a down year. So there is certainly a lot of opportunity, not unlike a team that I talk about way too much, Buffalo, where they got off to a terrible start for the year. Now really turning things around, right? It's still early on in the year. We're only about halfway through, plenty of time to make a lot of noise.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, well, don't reach out to Neil because he'll just remind you the Giants are 4-1 like he does to me. But yeah, but yeah. I mean, again, that's just what happens when you have a conference like the MEAC and you're playing a couple paycheck games. I think Norfolk State had two. They had two FBS games, and then they played like some really good FCS teams. And they started out 0-5. I mean, same thing like Morgan State. Though Morgan State did beat Sacred Heart. I mean, a team that went to the playoffs last year. But yeah, like it's just tough when you have such a huge room for error in non-conference. But I'm looking forward to see who makes a celebration bowl from that conference.
Moving on, we'll go ahead and go to our main portion of the program, talking about the Bilitnikov Award. It goes to the nation's best receiver, right? And remember, it's not just wide receiver, although it is predominantly right. It's for all pass catchers, technically running backs as well, if they consistently catching the ball out of the backfield. I guess it could even go to quarterbacks if you consider Taysom Hill quarterback, right? If there's some equivalent down at the college level. That said, there are only two non-wide receivers on the original watch list for the year. That's going to be two tight ends, Brock Bowers from Georgia and Michael Mayer from Notre Dame. That said, I think it should just be made aware, right? I think I'm talking about all wide receivers. I'm sure you are as well. But it is named after the great Montreal Alouette and Oakland
Yes,
Raider Fred
sir.
Biletnikoff, right? While we're talking about this award, I do want to keep some dates in mind because there is just some logistical stuff that does impact how this award is going to be given out. The week of November 14th, that's when the semifinalists are going to be selected by the Bilitnikov Award Committee. The next week, the week of November 21st, that's when the three finalists are made from the list of semifinalists. And then the week of November 28th, the week after Thanksgiving, that's when the vote is to determine the winner. We find out the winner December 8th at the Home Depot College Football Awards. So just to keep in mind, if you go off starting November 14th or the weekend before, doesn't really do you much good, right? So you need to be peaking in a couple weeks from now, really, to get noticed, right? As the committee is starting to hunker down, and I'm sure putting on a lot of all 22 to vote on these guys. Not really.
I mean, yeah, that's a good point too, because like so that kind of like I guess kind of derails one of the points I had in terms of like having these like showcase games because a lot of the guys I have are group of five guys that will have those weeknight games, especially the American. The American has I mean, they are heavy on the weeknight games, so the Thursday and Friday night games. Like one of the best finishes of the year was Houston Tulane, and it got a lot of attention because it was on a Friday night. So the same thing with like the guys. Like I have a couple guys in the American that are on my radar for the Biletnikoff. But those Friday night games fall, or one of them at least falls later on in the season, especially for I'll just spoil it. Rasheed Rice for SMU. He's got a game November 17th against Tulane. Tulane very well could come into that game ranked. It'll be a home game for Tulane at Yeoman Stadium. But again, might be too late for any awards left for Rasheed Rice, but as I look up and the Yankees just homered on my Guardians. But yeah, I mean, I appreciate you bringing that point, Jackson, about the voting because that's something we get lost in. Like, and I remember in 2020 when it's like we got a look at the voting process for the Heisman when they first off announced the voting during because it was a weird pandemic season, right? And so like end of December, they announced the voting, I guess the order from like 10 to number 4, and then they revealed the 3 finalists, which kind of gave a look into, oh, so that's a Heisman's process where like, they don't just randomly come up with like 3 guys out of thin air, for the Heisman race. So yeah, I mean it's just good to see the inner workings of these awards.
I did try to like count the number of voters from the Bilitnikov Award website, because they do have all the voters on there. It was like two a row. I was like, I'll take a minute and do this. I mean, it was way too long. There are like hundreds of voters on this thing, right? And they're all media members, some from PFF, some from very local media. There were even some people from NFL Sirius XM radio. So like all over sports media that are voting on this thing, right? I'm sure not all of them have the time to dedicate to each of these. So that's why we're keeping that in mind. You're keeping brands into account. You're keeping just pure stat lines, right? Because they can't watch every
Looks like we have a little bit of a technical difficulties for a second, so wait on Jackson to come back here. He was making a great point about the voting, because a lot of times it's
we need.
interesting oh, there we go. Had some difficulties. This point we had some difficulties. You froze on my end, so
Oh, gotcha. I was just saying, I was looking at the number of voters. It is hundreds. It is way too many to count on there. They're all media members from all facets of sports media. So I think how we're dividing it up, 3 guys that we really like the tape of and how they play. And then our prediction as well, where you keep in mind brand, you keep in mind the stat sheet, right? Because those are things that a lot of voters are going to be looking at, because I'm sure this isn't the only award they're voting for.
yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, we talked about it beforehand in our format, but yeah, it's a lot of the guys. I mean, and it's just sad because I mentioned this before the podcast, Jackson, about how last year we had a guy, Devin Tompkins, 96 catches, over 1,500 yards last year, not a finalist for the Biletnikoff Award, played for Utah State, and it wasn't a bad Utah State team. This is a Utah State team that ended up winning the Mountain West. So it's just sad how like a lot of these group of 5 guys kind of get overlooked, and it's like it's kind of weird because I think it just depends on the year, honestly. With some of these voters, like last year, they weren't feeling the group of 5 guys, but in 2018, they sent Andy Isabella from 4-8 UMass to be a finalist for the Biletnikoff Award. So it's like, I kind of want some consistency with the award, but it just shows. I mean, even still with like the lack of consistency at times, it is still a Power 5 centric award, in my opinion.
No, it absolutely is a Power 5 centric award, and part of that is the attention that is given to the Power 5 in media rights, right? It's like we see the most popular time slots of these games go to Power 5, and I don't know how many of these voters are watching Monday through Friday, or I guess Sunday through Friday, right? On these games where and it's not just Saturday, because frankly, if your attention is on college football only on Friday nights and all day Saturday, you're not going to be as well rounded in your knowledge of these guys that you need in order to make an informed decision. And maybe there are plenty of voters that do that, I'm sure, but there's a few hundred of them, right? So not all of them can do it. So
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I guess Jackson, on that note, I guess who are the 3 guys that really stand out to you for the Biletnikoff Award?
absolutely. So I would go ahead and go with my first guy, ironically from the Power 5, albeit it is a less successful Power 5 program than other ones we'll talk about. Jacob Cowing, the wide receiver from Arizona. He did transfer from UTEP, and we talked about him extensively on Hardware when he was there. Last year, now this was last year, but this is a stat that really caught my eye. That really is the only stat or number I can give you that really encapsulate his level of play. He had 111 QBR when targeted, which is just insane efficiency when he's targeted, right? Not even completions. The yards after the catch, though, is what really like pops off on his tape, though. I really wish we had like the access to next gen stats and GPS where we can like model the yards over expected, just because there's contact and then there's yards after catch where he's just just crushing in that category and really padding the stat sheet with that. At UTEP, he did play with talent level where he could clearly come off the screen, right? That was one question going into this year that I know I had about him. I'm sure you did too. Can he really pop off when he's going against the Pac-12, right? And in more fair competition with that. And so far he has. Maybe it's not as drastic as it was when he was at UTEP, but you certainly see that where he's making a huge impact at Arizona. Where I think you can give credit to that, to Arizona's play calling and scheme design, right? Where they're using him in one of two ways primarily. He's either taking the top off the defense with like a deep post or just a straight up go route where he's using his speed and utilizing that. And there's going to be enough separation where you don't have to be Tom Brady to drop the ball in the bucket, right? In order to be precise enough to get a completion. They're also baking in easy completions to the system on high completion routes from the slot where he's the first read and then trusting Jacob's elusiveness to get the yards after the catch from there. So he's been awesome to watch, very productive in Arizona. Hopefully he can finish out the year strong before November 14th and 21st, where all this voting starts to happen.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, Arizona, I mean, they've had a resurgent year, 3-3 right now. They just had their first sellout in a while. But I mean, they're still a couple years away, but Jacob Cowling's been a good sign of that rebuild out there for Arizona. I mean, thing is with Cowling again, the whole late night thing. I mean, they play USC and UCLA in back-to-back weeks. I'm kind of banking on those games being primetime games on Fox or ABC, I guess, because I don't think ABC's because ABC gets to pick two Saturday night games for the Pac-12. So one of those might be the second Saturday night game. Just depends on how USC and UCLA do. So maybe then you get some exposure. But again, this is being on the West Coast too, which it isn't fair at all. But I mean, Cowling's done great, and if anything too, I think Cowling's a testament to the system out there at UTEP because one of the top receivers in the country as well. I guess top, I'd say 10, 15 is Tyron Smith out of UTEP, a guy who has 39 catches for 616 yards. But it's kind of strange you say that because everyone knows about the UTEP Boise State upset. The offense worked well when Gavin Hardison was throwing less because he went 10 for 11 that game, and the offense ran well. I mean, when Gavin Hardison throws 50 plus passes like he did last week against Louisiana Tech, the UTEP system doesn't work well. So it's kind of funny how that works out. It's like they got a strong play action game. Dana Dimmel's coordinator. They run that kind of like Kansas State type system. But I guess that's more on Cowling's UTEP years. I guess my first guy, not staying in Conference USA. I guess not Conference USA, excuse me, sorry. I'm going all over the place with it. I'm thinking about him being at UTEP, because I'm here in El Paso. But my first guy, I got Keelan Stokes for Tulsa, 5'10", 200-pound guy, a 6-year senior who's really been around. And I guess he saved the best for last this year because he's got 47 catches, over 760 yards. He's got 7 touchdowns, I believe. But he's just been playing so well on a Tulsa team that hasn't had the best of years. I mean, they hung around against Ole Miss, but I think that was more of an anomaly than anything, especially considering what happened last week as they let Navy drop a 50 burger on him. But Stokes is a small guy. He's explosive. He's exciting. He's a deep threat. I mentioned the thing about the weeknight games. He's got a game next Friday on the 21st against Temple at the Link. But the thing is that's a Friday night game. It's cool and all, but Temple's 2-3. They probably come into that game at 2-4. So it just I don't think many eyes will be on that one. He also has a Thursday night game on the 10th against Memphis, which probably should have more eyes in it. But like you said, that shouldn't really be the time that you're peaking. So Keelan Stokes might not have the best chances. But I mean, if you look at the schedule ahead, got a key game against Tulane on November 5th. Could play the spoiler there if he has a huge game there. And a little bit of a receiver duel on the 29th between SMU and Tulsa with Rasheed Rice, who I already revealed to be one of my guys, and Keelan Stokes. So we'll see. We'll see what happens there with Tulsa and Keelan Stokes. But I think at the stats he's putting up, he's the leading receiver in the country by almost 100 yards. I think if he keeps up the pace, like he's got to be a finalist too, especially with like no other Power 5 guys in like the same statistical neighborhood yards wise. So
Absolutely. And from a scouting perspective with Caitlin Stokes, he has another like 61 kickoff returns for over 1,200 yards, right? So the special teams facet that he can bring to your roster at the next level is certainly a benefit. We've seen it come into play before plenty of times. Look at Jalen Darden, Jalen Micken, right? That Buccaneer wide receiver competition that happened earlier this year where you had to cut one, you ended up going the guy with the special teams experience, right? So absolutely. I'll go ahead and move on to my next guy, a guy I talked about last week, Ollie Jennings, the wide receiver from Old Dominion. Elite ball skills. He is right up there with almost anyone in the country as far as his ability to go up and get the ball and grab it just as a rebound, right? Like it looks like a tight end in that aspect. Second in the nation in receiving yards, right? Which certainly doesn't hurt, right behind your guy, Keelan Stokes. I think he'll grab more attention from like scouts than media members, right? Just because he is at a smaller school, which is difficult. But he does have so much raw talent that it is fun to watch. My main concern with him, his route running is underdeveloped, right? However, that sounds like a knock. I think that the coaching staff, though, is making the right decision kind of, and that instead of focusing on like precision route running, like think Cooper Kupp and like Stephon Diggs, right? Like think of instead of that type of receiver, they're utilizing his more unique physical attributes that make him better versus Conference USA competition, as opposed to where if they tried to get him to be more precise with his footwork and all that, it would slow him down and not utilize what his talent is. So I think they're making the right decision. Keep doing these simple routes where he can play fast and he can only get better from there.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, the thing with Old Dominion is I wish that they would have kept up the role they were on in the Sun Belt. Because they beat Virginia Tech. And I think had they beaten Virginia, I think the season would be different. They'd have more momentum. But they have games where they can play spoiler. I'm not sure where they are in the voting cutoff, but I know that they have games against App State. I think this upcoming weekend is their game against Coastal Carolina. So I mean, if they can play the spoiler and upset Coastal Carolina there, I can see a path where Ollie Jennings gets some votes for the Biletnikoff because that's a nationally relevant game if they end up knocking off Coastal Carolina because Coastal Carolina is probably I'd say probably the favorite to go to the New Year's Six if they go undefeated and beat Virginia, with the Power Five win and they go 13-0 in the Sun Belt, which the Sun Belt's one of the toughest Group of Five conferences, if not the toughest right now. So yeah, I mean, great
It's
ball
only
skills.
had one game. Oh, sorry.
No. Go ahead, mate. Go ahead. I was just
Only one game with less than 120 yards receiving. So it is very plausible that he can have another like 200-yard game against a Coastal Carolina team. And that certainly would bring a lot of attention.
Yeah, I mean, Coastal Carolina, I think they allowed over I guess a high amount of pass yards against Army, so not always a good sign for a pass defense. But yeah, no, I mean the opportunities are there for spotlight games, but the thing that hurts is having James Madison. And I get why they did it. That's a former Colonial Athletic Association rivalry, but it's on Thanksgiving weekend. But I mean, it hurts that game is at the the bottom of the schedule to help with this voting, but it makes sense though. It makes sense to have a nice Virginia Commonwealth rivalry on Thanksgiving weekend. So Ollie Jennings was my guy. I do want to note that he put his best effort against Ace. I guess that's not a good term. He had his best performance against ACC teams with 219 yards combined against against Virginia Tech and UVA. So my last guy is I got Rasheed Rice, and I think the thing that helps Rasheed Rice is like you just think about all the receivers that have come from SMU in recent years. You have like James Prochet, Trey Quinn, Danny Gray, like the list goes on and on and on. Like so many like great receivers from SMU, almost where it's like a given that SMU is going to produce a good wide receiver. And I think Rasheed Rice is that guy. Earlier this year had an amazing performance against Maryland, 11 catches, 193 yards. Had he come out on top of that game, I think his outlook would be better. Had he had a better game against TCU, I think his outlook would be better as well because he had less than 100 yards. That's his only game of the year without 100 yards. For any receiver in the country, 6 catches, 74 yards isn't a bad game at all, not by any stretch. But for Rasheed Rice, underwhelming. And I think that's a compliment for him for the performances that he's had this year. Got some huge games coming up before the voting cycle. He's got a Friday night game this Friday, actually, against Navy for the Gantz Trophy. SMU coming as 12.5 point favorites. So you could see him have a big performance on a Friday night, getting into the national eye because again, Navy is a national brand, and they're probably the most prominent program playing on Friday night. I'll have to check the schedule again really quick, just to see who exactly is playing on Friday night. But yeah, I mean, you have Rasheed Rice, 687 yards, 43 catches, 6'2", 203, great ball skills. And he also has a game against Cincinnati the week after this one on the 22nd. So the schedule is there, but the numbers don't stack up to say, a Keelan Stokes. But he's in the top 5 nationally receiving.
I mean, whenever you can, we talked about how this award is very stat heavy, right? And so whenever you can be in the top 5 in the category and be at a school that does have established success at that position, it at least helps you out, right? SMU is a group of 5 program. It is not like it's not like no one knows about them, right? Like everyone knows about, everyone in sports media at least knows about the history of SMU receivers and at least a few of the names that they'll recognize, right? So, and even if it wasn't under the same coaching staff, it certainly helps. He also looks the part, right? He's like 6'2", 203. Some of these guys that we're talking about, like under 6 foot. So whenever you can, like I said, look the part, it certainly helps. I'll go ahead and go with my last guy, Jake Bobo, the wide receiver from UCLA and Duke transfer. On the year, 24 receptions, 385 yards, and 5 touchdowns. He's a 5th-year senior that already has more touchdowns at this point than he did in his first 4 years combined. So just incredible production so far, averaging about 16 yards per catch, which is just an insane average for that sample size, right? And I always ask Omar, I look at the game by game breakdown, the game log, and say, hey, how do you perform in big games and not in the stat padding games against ranked teams? 9 receptions for 164 yards and 4 touchdowns. Against Colorado and a pair of group of 5 or FCS opponents, 12 receptions, 183 yards, and 1 touchdown. That shows me that they're relying on Jake when it's most important. And this is UCLA. This is a team that has very high expectations. Two top 15 matchups, had a pair of touchdowns in each of them.
Yeah, I mean, Jake Bobo, I mean, he's had some good performances. I'm a little bit underwhelmed by the catch totals, 24. Yeah, 24 up to this point in 6 games, about 4 catches per game. And it's not like those are high volume, like high yards per cat or, deep balls. 5 touchdowns and 24 catches, it's good volume for his touchdowns. But I mean, again, like I think we're on the fast
The
track. I don't
Travis
want to jinx
Kelce
it.
of college football. Did you watch the game last night, Omar?
I did. I was amazed by the stat line. I
7
was amazed by the
receptions for
stat
4
line.
touchdowns.
Yeah, I was amazed by it. But yeah, like I mean, if we're on the fast track for undefeated USC versus undefeated UCLA on November 19th, then maybe Bobo's stock goes up in the Biletnikoff. Maybe Bobo's and Jordan Addison's goes up in the Biletnikoff. But as for now, I just don't think the stats are there. I mean, there's a very real chance, Jackson, that he does not reach 1,000 yards. So like, I mean, it's hard for me to get behind him as a Biletnikoff finalist, even though he's on a UCLA team that's a national title contender at the moment.
I think he's getting there. I think if the voting were today, he would not be on that list, certainly, right? But the what we have is good, and so it shows me that the ceiling is high, and I want to see him continue that. Like I said, what I love most about Jake is that they're relying on him when it is an important game, right? Or when it is an important when it is a close matchup or a top 15 matchup. And so yes, maybe he could have had, maybe he could have had another 100 yards versus South Alabama, but I'll take that the touchdowns versus Washington and Utah any day.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, yeah, like we'll see because again, UCLA doesn't really they haven't really played from behind except for the South Alabama game. It's the only game they really played from behind from. And I
Exactly.
guess the
Yeah.
Bowling Green game too. The Bowling Green game they played from behind only in the first half before they blew that game wide open. So maybe they played from behind and Bo was the main target in the comeback. That then I can see it, but it's just hard for me. It's just hard for me with 385 yards through 6 games. It's really hard.
That's fair. I will give you that. I will give you that.
So yeah, I mean, I guess we're on to predictions now. So my prediction for the winner of the Biletnikoff is it's gonna be an Ohio State wide receiver, and it's not gonna be the one that people thought, going into the year. It's not Jackson Smith and Jigba, but I have Emeka Egbuka, who is, fourth nationally in receiving yards with 655 yards, 6 touchdowns on only 35 catches, averaging, I think, if I'm doing my quick maths right, it's about like 18 yards per catch, 17, 18 yards per catch. So a certified deep threat, 6 touchdowns and 35 catches. That's like touchdown catch every 6 receptions. Plays on Ohio State, probably gonna make the playoff, even if they go 11-1 with the loss to Michigan. So that's my prediction for winner. For second place, I actually have Charlie Jones from Purdue because I know Charlie Jones is getting some love on Twitter and Instagram as a finalist because I think he had one of his games he had an absolutely insane performance. And I'm looking it up right now, which one of the games it was that caught everyone's eye. It was the game against Syracuse where he had 11 touchdowns for 11 receptions for 188 yards and a touchdown catch, but he's kind of cooled off from there. But again, he's got 50 catches for 603 yards. He's in the top 15, I believe, nationally receiving. That's my second place guy. And I got Keelan Stokes coming in third, honestly. Just that's not my opinion. If they're up to me, I think Keelan Stokes, if he ends up being the national leading receiver, then he would be winning the Biletnikoff. That's how I see the voting shaking out, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I will go ahead and go with I just had the winner. I didn't even do the second and third place. So good on you, Omar, for putting that work in. I'll go ahead and go. We had one Ohio State wide receiver that at the beginning of the year, pretty much everyone thought that was going to win it. Then we have another Ohio State wide receiver who you think is going to win it. And I have another Ohio State receiver who I think is going to win it. Marvin Harrison Jr., the sophomore from Ohio State. Man, the name certainly doesn't hurt, right? I will give you that. Honestly, he just looks like another elite Ohio State wide receiver. Obviously the son of the former or the Pro Football Hall of Famer. What really catches me is just the footwork and the route running for how young he is, right? It's so impressive, like what he's doing right now, stat wise, because this is a stat heavy position again. Leads the nation in touchdowns, right, by a whole one. He's not tied with anyone else. 9 touchdowns on the year, 31 receptions for 536 yards. So in no danger of not reaching that 1,000-yard point, right? I'm sure that they'll get him to that. Man, it's also easy to get noticed when CJ Stroud is throwing you the ball, and that goes for both of us, right? He just makes it look so easy, and certainly Ohio State is never a team that lacks attention.
Absolutely. I mean, like it just shows the depth that Ohio State has in the receiving core. To have 3 guys, like you said, like one guy that was a national media favorite, another guy that had that some people can see winning it, and another guy that is a front runner with his stats. So it just shows the depth of that program in the receiving core. But I'm excited to see how it shakes up. We're entering the second half of the season, so things certainly can change. Some guys can play catch up. I mean, as the paycheck games are over, some guys, I guess the real cream will rise to the top. The real cream will rise to the top. So, yeah, that's all I
Mark,
got for the
trivia question: Who do you know who leads the nation in receptions right now? Not receiving yards or touchdowns, but just straight up receptions.
Is that Charlie Jones?
He is in second. Charlie Jones is in second place by a whole 7 receptions. Xavier Hutchinson, the wide receiver from Iowa State, is in first place.
Yeah, I feel like we kind of forgot about. I think his case is hurt by a couple things. When we think about Iowa State, we think about like Brees Hall and like that whole running. I guess when we think about Iowa State scheme, we think about Brees Hall, whether that's wrong or not. Brees Hall since graduated. I think a lot of people think about Iowa State having a good run game, and just also too, Iowa State is just. I think they may have peaked, to be honest with you, as much as it hurts to say. And I just don't. I just don't see the media being Iowa State crazy when it comes to voting for awards, but
I don't either. I don't either. I
it
don't.
sucks. It sucks.
Omar, do you want to go ahead and go with our games to watch for the week?
Yeah, so I'll start. Yeah, I'll start with of course, a hardware tradition like no other. We have the Ivy League Friday night preview. We got Brown versus Princeton, and Brown. I mean, in 2019 and 2021, they had the first week game, against Harvard, the first Friday night game, because Brown was just not good at all in those 2 years. But Brown is 2-2. They have wins over Central Connecticut State. They have a win over Bryant. Jake Wilcox is throwing the ball well, 1,047 yards and 8 touchdowns, but he's got a challenge against him with the Princeton defense, a defense that allows less than 10 points per game and has allowed 8 points per game. Count them, 8 points per game in their last 2 games. It should be 6 points per game because they beat Lafayette 23-2. So it's like not really on the defense, but less than 10 points per game. And it's not just on offense. Andre Yoshivas, what a fun name to say. Andre Yoshivas for Princeton has 408 yards and 3 touchdowns for the Tigers. That game is on Friday night at 7 o'clock Eastern, 5 Mountain Time for me. Should be a fun game. I think Brown hangs around, honestly. But I just think Princeton's defense is just too much, honestly. I think their defense is too much. But Princeton's a bit one-dimensional on offense. Their leading rusher only has 169 rushing yards in 4 games for an average of 40 yards per game. And the team totals, if I can pull those up, let's see, team statistics. Yeah, the ESPN app is failing me right now, but I'm gonna have to do some quick maths in my head. The top 2 leading rushers are only averaging, for that matter, the top 3 rushers go like this. You have the leading rusher with 169 carries. The leading rusher his name is Ryan Butler, has 169 yards and 42 carries. The next leading rusher is 61 yards. The next leading rusher is 60 yards. So that's a total of about 291 yards in 4 games. That's less than 70 that's less than 80 yards per game between the top 3 rushers. So Princeton's looking a bit one-dimensional, and I think that can keep Brown in this game, but I think Princeton's defense just wears out Brown in the end.
Absolutely, definitely, man. Looking forward to that one. I'll go ahead and go with, again, the polar opposite end of the spectrum, right? Oklahoma State at TCU. Man, I thought this easily could have been game day, right? This is one of the best games of the week, if not the best. It feels like when everyone else is paying attention to division races and who they need to pull for to lose, and obviously you need your own team to win. The Big 12 is not paying attention to that because there are no divisions, right? It is just the 2 best conference records that go against each other at AT&T Stadium at the end of it. So there are these 2 teams, and then there's Kansas State. Those are the only ones left without a Big 12 lost. So the loser of this game really joins Baylor, Texas, and Kansas, where it is possible, albeit an uphill battle, to go to the Big 12 championship after this. So looking forward to seeing how this shakes out.
Yeah, and right now there's like a 3-week stretch, I think, starting on the 22nd, where Kansas State plays. I think they play TCU. They got, I think, Baylor in that span. They got Oklahoma State. Like, I mean, they're like, we're gonna learn a lot about the Big 12 in the coming weeks. Like right now, it looks like it's hard. It's really hard to tell who the top 2 teams are gonna be, but it's gonna be an exciting race. But I do think the Big 12 will cannibalize itself and eliminate itself from the playoff, kind of like it did last year, where the Big 12 was 1 yard away from making the playoff over Cincinnati. But again, I think that just makes the Big 12 fun. While we still have Oklahoma and Texas, so it's something definitely to treasure. Again, I guess going back to the opposite end of the spectrum for me, we have Howard versus Harvard at Audi Field, home of Major League Soccer's DC United out there in Washington D.C. for the Truth and Service Classic. That was a mouthful, but Howard is playing their second Ivy League opponent this year. Howard showed strong fight against Yale earlier this year, losing 34-26. That game was a 1-touchdown game with 5 minutes to play until Yale, sealed the game with a touchdown with 2 minutes left, and then Howard threw on a garbage time touchdown. Harvard has shown some vulnerability this year, though. Especially against Cornell, and improving Cornell squad last week. They only beat Cornell 35-28 in a thrilling Friday night game. It took them overtime to beat Merrimack took them overtime and beat Merrimack in week 1 on a Friday night. And they only beat Brown, a team that they've dominated the past 2 meetings, 35-28. So you can kind of see, some kind of magic happening out there in DC, in the nation's capital. You got Howard's Showcase Classic. It's going to be a home crowd out there in DC. Harvard coming to town for a rare Ivy League HBCU game. I think there's a little bit of upset alert here with Harvard. I mean, so we'll see. That game will be on ESPN3 at 4 o'clock Eastern, with a tape delay airing on ESPNU at 10:30 p.m. Eastern time.
Gotta love the ESPNU tape delays on there, just in case you don't have the app. I'll go ahead and go with Air Force at UNLV. Man, Air Force coming off of a very disappointing loss last week to really a bad Utah State team. Then UNLV coming off with maybe a more disappointing loss, you could even argue, to San Jose State, because that really did determine the division. This is an important game for both teams. Don't get me wrong, man. This is a must win though for Air Force. In the Mountain West Mountain Division, Boise State has quietly snuck to the top, right? They got off to a 2-2 start. Now they're 3-0 in the conference. Air Force is the only other team in that division that has a 4-2 or better record. So if they lose one more, it's really the expectation that their season is done, especially when you consider the very high expectations that we all put on Air Force in the beginning of the year.
Yeah, I mean, I thought Wyoming. I thought that game was a fluke for Air Force, because it's hard to win at Wyoming. Honestly, it's hard the way that they play ball, the tough defense, the strong run game. It's tough to win against Wyoming. But the Utah State loss, there's really no excusing that one, honestly, especially with the way Utah State's played this year. Again, like you said, 3 losses. Like Boise State, Boise State sneaking up the standings, and if everyone else loses, then Boise State and Wyoming will be the 2 top dogs out of the Mountain West Mountain Division, with both teams having 1 loss. Heck, even Utah State, they might right the ship. Honestly, there's a chance for them to right the ship with that win over Air Force. So it's really hard to tell who's good in the Mountain West and who's not, except for one team, and that is the San Jose State Spartans, who really look like the best team in the Mountain West this year. They have Fresno State in their Valley rivalry game. This rivalry game. It's a neat rivalry. They play for a huge V that has circuit board type wiring, into it to represent Silicon Valley. So that game is going to be at 10:45 Eastern on Fox Sports 1. Fresno State will not have Jake Haener for this one. Again, Logan Fife struggled at quarterback last week, throwing for only 135 yards against Boise State. On the other hand, it could not be more the opposite for San Jose State, with Chevin Cordero playing the best football he's played all year, rushing for over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns, and throwing for over 300 yards against UNLV, and earning Mountain West Player of the Week. I think this one could be a statement victory, not as much a resume victory, but it's a huge statement victory for the San Jose State program to dominate the rival. Sorry, I didn't throw for over 200 yards. He threw for 230 yards, not over 300. But for San Jose State to dominate the rival that had dominated them so many years, you just think about that stretch where San Jose State was really, down bad. I mean, I think in 2018 they went 1-12. But for San Jose State to not just beat Fresno State, but beat them by a lot, beat them handily, huge statement win for the program, and should be a win that San Jose State fans look back to fondly. I'm not giving them the win right here, right now, right here, but this one is one to watch. It would have been more palatable had Jake Haener been able to play. Nothing against Logan Fife, but Jake Haener is a tough quarterback to replace.
Jake Haener is one of the better quarterbacks in college football, right? If you had to make a top list at the top 10, 15, 20, he would definitely be on there, right? So always tough when you see Jake Haener without Jake Haener, but man, San Jose State does look like the real deal yet again. I'll go ahead and go with another rivalry that does participate in exchanging a trophy back and forth to the winner. Probably the total opposite of a circus board, just like a rock, the Dakota marker, right? Just a nice, it looks like just a stone pile on with North Dakota and South Dakota on each side, right? Man, I don't think there's many rivalries bigger in the FCS. I don't know if there's any at all than South Dakota State, North Dakota State. Not many at least. South Dakota State has won the last couple years. Yes, last year it was, or yes, this year it is in the Fargo Dome, so always difficult to play there, but no team has won there more since it opened than South Dakota State. Man, in the FCS, it's number 1 versus number 2. It's a rivalry game. The only losses for both teams, they're both 5-1. They both come from FBS opponents, right? This is the 113th meeting all time. And if South Dakota State wins, it'll be their first time winning 3 times in a row since 1987, right? So a chance to make history for this squad. One of the main reasons, though, I do give the edge to North Dakota State in this matchup is just the offensive line, man. With experience comes expertise. There's a combined 211 career games of experience between their 5 starters, which is just an insane number. So
Yeah, and so the thing with this rivalry is you wish it was played on the final weekend of the season, but with North Dakota joining the fold in the Missouri Valley Conference, it makes more sense to have the Buffalo Nickel rivalry on the final weekend, but I mean, shoot, it doesn't get more big every single year than the Dakota Marker rivalry. I remember us talking about it in the spring, but I mean, there's whispers saying for Walter Payton watch, we have a Hunter Lipke for North Dakota State. I mean, he's probably there has not been a running back to win the Walter Payton Award. Ironically, even though it's called the Walter Payton Award, there's not been a running back to win the Walter Payton Award since I think 2003 when a running back from Colgate won it. So, I mean, how great would it be for not just a running back, but I mean, Hunter Lipke goes, I mean, they call him a fullback. A lot of people call him a fullback to win the award. So like that could be a huge Walter Payton Award statement game for him. My final game, I'm gonna go to a former FCS power in Texas State, and this one was a really sneaky result last week where Texas State beat App State. They didn't just squeak by them; they beat them by 2 touchdowns, and it didn't even seem that close as App State scored, or as Texas State led by as much as 23 in the second half. And Texas State, they have a path to a bowl game. You look at the remaining schedule. This week they play Troy in my last game to watch. Troy surprisingly is a 16-point favorite on Texas State. I think that's a spread to hammer right there. But they've got Troy, they have Southern Miss, which is a very winnable game. Southern Miss coming at 2-3. They have Louisiana Monroe on the road, which again can go either way, but very winnable. They have South Alabama, they have Arkansas State, which again very winnable. And then Louisiana Louisiana is in the midst of rebuild. It looks like this year that's a game that they can win. So not only can Texas State go 6-6, they can potentially solidify themselves for a bowl spot with a 7-5 record. Playing quarterback for them imagine how great a story it would be if Lane Hatcher, the former Arkansas State quarterback who had been benched for so many other quarterbacks, whether it be Logan Bonner now at Utah State, if Lane Hatcher wins and gets a 6 win against his former team, Arkansas State. But going back to this weekend, we have Texas State versus Troy, a Troy team that almost beat App State themselves. They have solid wins against Western Kentucky, who looks like they'll probably go to the Conference USA title game. They beat Marshall by 2 scores. I guess, the week after Marshall, or not the week after, I guess, but I guess a couple weeks after Marshall beat Notre Dame. So should be a great game out in the Sun Belt. I'm not liking that 16-point spread. I think Texas State covers.
Texas State that was a surprising matchup. It really snuck by, especially with all the attention that you consider that was on App State earlier in the year. Not just from the A&M win. That A&M win really catapulted it, right? But we did see a lot more attention, and it's really quickly fallen off as well. But yeah, man, that's it for me. Anything else for you this week before we head off?
No, just a lot of good football. I will note that Holy Cross beat Bucknell 57-0 in the EBW Classic at Polar Park, and it was it didn't even seem like that close. So might be time to have the Matt Sluka for Walter Payton Award discussion pretty soon. But that's all I got right here.
Can't have it too early. Gotta do it closer to the voting, man. Come on.
I mean, close to the voting, but
College football work 101.
that is a man who is, I guess, testifying for himself very well. A young man is testifying for himself very well as the season goes on. But that's all I got. Another great weekend of football. And until next time, everyone, peace, love, and soul.